An unwary young man would be lucky to escape these bars with his wallet or virginity intact. Some soldiers found their way to the USO in downtown Saigon, an island of Americana in a sea of Vietnamese. There they could phone their families or girlfriends back home, or maybe have a hamburger and a milkshake at the snack bar. From the USO they might walk another block to Tudo Street. Once home of Saigon's high-fashion district during the French colonial era, it had now turned to upscale tea bars catering to American soldiers and civilians. Many of the girls here spoke English good enough to carry on a true conversation. Generally, they did not offer themselves for sale, preferring instead to bungalow, a type of temporary marriage between the girl and her American boyfriend, where each supplied the other's needs for the duration of the soldier's tour. A number of Tudo's tea girls were so good at selling tea they didn't need to sell themselves or to bungalow. The next morning, after breakfast at the Capitol Hotel, newbies, as they were called, boarded a 2.5-ton truck for a 20-minute trip to Tan Son Nhut and Davis Station's personnel office. While they might not have noticed the Davis Memorial when they entered the compound, few would have missed the James Davis photograph and story mounted on the personnel office waiting room wall, causing many a man to recall the Army recruiter's claim that there is no ASA in Vietnam. After being issued MACV ration cards and completing documentation, they were taken to the Vietnamese JGS compound for a short briefing at White Birch, the 509th Group's operational headquarters. By now they would have learned that a newly arrived soldier was called a newbie, or a nug, meaning new useless guy, and was an object of scorn for all the old-timers.
How long you been in country, fresh meat? You're so new you ain't been born yet.
These taunts would stick with them until their brand-new jungle fatigues had faded to a lighter shade of olive drab. Travel orders usually took 2 or 3 days to be issued, and in the meantime the newbies would spend their daytime hours at Davis Station attending an acclimatization course, a euphemism for cutting grass, filling sandbags, and performing other menial outdoor tasks. Lunch could be taken at the mess hall, but more likely they'd go to Davis Station's air-conditioned EM club to eat. Not only was there relief from the tropical heat, but the restaurant's food was much better. If they were lucky, they'd be there on a day when a band was playing or a movie was being shown during lunchtime. A few might discover that the nearby Vietnam Air Force Officers Club was also open to American soldiers of all ranks. Its main attraction for them was a bar at the rear that they called the Snake Pit, a name derived from its pitch darkness and the activities that took place inside. Once travel orders were issued, their party ended, and they were taken to Tan Son Nhut's 8th Aerial Port. In 1968, the aerial port had no passenger terminal, only a small wooden shack for a passenger counter, and rain or shine, soldiers had to wait for their planes on the tarmac. Once they boarded the plane, usually an Air Force C-130 Hercules or C-123 Provider, it was only a 45-minute flight to Cam Ranh's 14th Aerial Port. While waiting outside its terminal entrance for an Air Force shuttle bus and the 10-minute ride to the NAF, some may have walked across the driveway to a mobile snack bar. If they had ordered a sandwich, they might have thought the bread had caraway seeds in it. With closer inspection, they would have found that they were actually flour weevils. Just a little more protein in the diet as far as the military was concerned. Arriving at the NAF, they went to the 1st RR's orderly room to sign in, then to finance and supply. Their brand new jungle fatigues immediately gave them away as newbies, giving rise to chuckles and taunts from old-timers as they passed by. Newbies were subject to some rather unusual initiation rites. One of these was a variation on the tar and feather routine. Once the unsuspecting newbie had fallen asleep in his bunk, a group would pounce upon him and carry him to the shower. Since most men slept only in their boxer shorts, it was easy to strip him naked. After a good soaking of water, he was carried outside and held to the ground while they covered him in sand amid the taunts and cheers of spectators. If they hadn't called home while they were in Saigon, newbies might visit the U.S. Air Force's Mars Station at Cam Ranh to make a call. The military-affiliated radio system was a cooperative effort between the overseas military branches and amateur ham operators in the United States to provide servicemen with a voice link with families back home. Receiving voice signals via shortwave radio, the U.S. ham operator would patch into domestic phone lines and make a collect call to the desired party. Unlike regular international phone lines in Saigon, however, the Mars system could transmit only one side of the conversation at a time, requiring the person to say "over" at the end of his or her conversation, indicating to the ham operator when to switch. For example, the first might say, "I love you, over," with the other responding, "I love you too, over." Neither private nor convenient, it was the only way for ordinary soldiers at Cam Ranh to talk to their family or friends back home. The 14th of January 1968, NAF saw the arrival of the Navy's Heavy Attack Squadron VAH-21. They brought with them 4 specially modified P-2H Neptunes, redesignated AP-2H, for a limited combat operational evaluation. The aircraft had been modified by E-Systems to carry a Trails and Roads Interdiction Multi-Sensor Package, or TRIM package, and used for night interdiction operations over the Mekong Delta. Painted in gray camouflage, they were easily distinguished from other P-2s on the flight line, but they had other major differences. All anti-submarine warfare equipment had been removed and re-outfitted with specialized radar systems, infrared and night vision sensors, and an integrated digital navigation and attack system. They were also armed with a twin 20mm cannon in a tail turret, and beneath the wings, miniguns and bombs. They also had a 40mm grenade launcher projecting below the bomb bay. Sound suppressors were also fitted to the engines and turbojets. On the 21st of January, news broke of a North Vietnamese pre-dawn attack against a U.S. Marine outpost at Khe Sanh, located aside the Lao border. The siege of Khe Sanh had begun. News bureaus reported that Khe Sanh was to be a replay of the Vietnamese siege of Dien Bien Phu, which had led to the defeat of the French 14 years earlier. Whether MACV commanders agreed with the headlines is uncertain, but Khe Sanh did divert their attention and resources. Regardless, the 77-day siege would prove to be a communist ploy. The 30th of January would mark the beginning of Tet, the Vietnamese New Year. According to the superstition, the year of the monkey was a harbinger of bad luck. Nevertheless, a mood of festivity prevailed among the Vietnamese as they anticipated family reunions, feasts, and fireworks. The mood at MACV, however, was uneasy. They were concerned about the growing number of North Vietnamese troops around Khe Sanh and One Corps, where General Westmoreland had recently shifted thousands of troops to strengthen defenses. MACV was disturbed too about a signal intelligence report they had received on the 25th of January, which predicted imminent enemy attacks throughout the country. The report, compiled by the National Security Agency, was based upon intelligence collected by the 509th Group and other intelligence sources. Not only did NSA report an unprecedented volume of urgent messages passing among major enemy commands, it provided specific and accurate warning of when and where the attacks would materialize. In response, MACV sent an alert to its commanders stating, "There may be Viet Cong activities at various U.S. and Vietnamese headquarters and government billets during the Tet New Year holidays, and Viet Cong suicide cadre are infiltrating into the capital." In what was one of America's biggest military blunders of the war, the NSA report and the MACV alert were virtually ignored. The Allies called for a unilateral 36-hour truce across the country, except in one corps where the battle at Khe Sanh continued. At the same time, nearly half the ARVN forces were given leave for the holidays. In the early hours of January 30th, the Viet Cong launched their Tet Offensive in the northern provinces, hitting Da Nang, Hue, Nha Trang, and other provincial capitals. They also made an attack at Cam Ranh, though it was limited to a lone frogman who succeeded in blowing a hole in the hull of a civilian cargo ship. He was captured. The Allies canceled the ceasefire, and although the ARVN holiday leave was also canceled, most of them would be unable, perhaps unwilling, to return to their units for several days. In Saigon, shortly after midnight on the 31st, some 4,500 Viet Cong emerged from their Saigon safe houses to gather at designated points to pick up their weapons that they had hidden. Just before 3 a.m., they shot an anti-tank rocket into the outer wall of the 4-acre U.S. Embassy. Members of the squad then crawled through the hole with their satchel charges, intending to blast their way into the embassy building. Taking some casualties, the embassy's Marine Guards kept them at bay outside the embassy building until the 7/16th MPs and Vietnamese National Police arrived and surrounded the compound. At daybreak, around 7:30, the MPs fought their way into the compound while paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division landed on the roof in helicopters. By 11:45, 9 hours after it had begun, the battle at the embassy was over. Outside the compound, however, it raged on across the country as 70,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong struck at more than 36 of Vietnam's 44 provincial capitals, 64 district towns, and dozens of villages and hamlets. The most spectacular of these battles centered on Saigon, leaving hundreds of its 3 million people killed and thousands homeless. In the Cho Lan district, street fighting turned fierce and whole neighborhoods were reduced to rubble by bombs and artillery. At Tan Son Nhut, rockets and mortars pounded onto the airbase as sappers breached perimeter defenses. There the men at Davis Station found themselves suddenly thrust in the battle as they took to the bunkers in defense of their compound. At White Birch, enemy had breached the JGS defenses. The battle came within 100 meters of the building before the enemy were either killed or turned back. By Sunday, the 4th of February, 6 days after the offensive had begun, order had been restored to Saigon and much of the country. While the Tet Offensive was on the wane, on the 18th of February, a rocket slammed into Tan Son Nhut, injuring 25 men of the 509th Group. Though the Battle of Hue continued, ultimate Allied victory was certain, coming on the 23rd of February. The Tet Offensive had left the Viet Cong so decimated that they would never recover. To American soldiers fighting in Vietnam, it had been a resounding victory, sending their morale soaring. To the American public, who watched the battles on their living room TVs half a world away, it looked a lot more like an American defeat, and their morale plummeted. Public opinion turned decisively against the war as anti-war protesters staged hundreds of demonstrations, and congressional opposition reached a new high. Spared the Tet Offensive, the Crazy Cats and others at Cam Ranh were reminded that they were still in a war zone when the enemy slammed rockets into the base on the night of March the 4th. Although no one is known to have been injured, some of the rockets ignited a row of fuel bladders in open storage next to the 14th Aerial Port's parking ramp. Fires were extinguished by the Air Force Fire Department, who dispatched firefighters on the ground and in the air. Seen in the light of day, the damage done was minor. One of the first political casualties of the Tet Offensive would be MACV Commander General Westmoreland. On the 22nd of March, President Johnson booted him upstairs, naming him the new Army Chief of Staff. The second political casualty would be the President himself. On Sunday night, the 31st of March, he addressed the nation.
Tonight I have ordered our aircraft and our naval vessels to make no attacks on North Vietnam, except in the area north of the demilitarized zone where the continuing enemy buildup directly threatens Allied forward positions and where the movement of their troops and supplies are clearly related to that threat.
Then he called upon Hanoi to join the U.S. in a negotiated settlement. He concluded with a statement that shocked the nation.
With American sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
On April 3rd, Hanoi announced its willingness to open preliminary peace talks, but rather than lessening hostilities, the communists increased attacks. When the preliminary peace talks finally opened in Paris on the 13th of May, they immediately bogged down on the issue of representation of the government of South Vietnam and the National Liberation Front, known as the Viet Cong. It would take months before this issue was resolved. On the 5th of April, 77 days after the siege of Khe Sanh had begun, 12,000 U.S. and ARVN troops finally reached the base, only to find the enemy had withdrawn into the jungles. What was billed as the showdown battle of the war never materialized. On the 10th of April, President Johnson named General Creighton Abrams the new MACV Commander-in-Chief, who would oversee the reduction of American military participation in the Vietnam War. That same month, the Crazy Cats got a new commander as well, with Major Cecil I. Ramsey succeeding Lieutenant Colonel Robert I. McElroy. Flying always has its hazards, and flying in wartime Vietnam only increased those risks, as the Crazy Cat flight crew of No. 531 would learn on a fateful Easter morning in April.
Easter Sunday morning, 14th of April, 1968, began with the usual routine. We had to rise and shine at 3 o'clock a.m., allowing time to get some breakfast, have a briefing, draw our flight gear, and pre-flight the aircraft. Takeoff was on time, 5 o'clock a.m. We flew up the coast to Hue and then turned inland to the designated listening area assigned for the day. It was 7:15, and we'd been on station for only a short time when suddenly we heard the burst of 37mm anti-aircraft artillery shells exploding around us. One round hit our left wing in the area around the flap and aileron, leaving a gaping hole and a lot of sheet metal flapping in the wind. I immediately took a full right aileron to keep the left wing up. Being Easter Sunday morning, I was reminded that this was a bad substitute for the traditional Easter sunrise service. Fortunately, the shell hit aft of the wing beam, which protected the fuel tanks from shrapnel. Had the shell hit 2 feet further forward in the fuel tanks, we would probably have gone down in a ball of fire. I told the radio operator to advise Cam Ranh Bay that we were hit but still airborne. With the aircraft still functioning okay, we decided to make Cam Ranh Bay our destination. The landing was hot, but otherwise uneventful. The taxi back to the parking ramp was normal, and we all breathed a great sigh of relief as we got back to the tarmac.
Although the Crazy Cat's missions were supposed to be secret, the incident became a subject of a cartoon in the Army Times newspaper. Along with repairs to 531's airframe, Purple Heart insignias were painted on each side of the fuselage near the cockpit. More importantly, a radar warning system was installed on 531 and all other mission aircraft. The display scope was located on the left side of the instrument panel and indicated when enemy radar was locked onto the aircraft, giving its direction and distance. When activated, a tone was sent over the intercom and a control box button lit up, hopefully giving the pilot enough advance warning to take evasive action. The 21st of April marked an important date for the original group of Crazy Cats. It was the day they became official short-timers. By tradition, a soldier became short when he had 69 days remaining before their date of expected return from overseas, or DEROS, the end of their Vietnam tour. Becoming short was usually celebrated by getting completely blasted on alcoholic beverages with those who had already attained short-timer status. The event also gave short-timers certain bragging rights to let others, especially newbies, to know exactly how short they were.
I am short.
Short are you?
I'm so short you gotta dig a hole to kick my ass. 27 days in a wake-up. I'm short.
26 in a wake-up. I'm so short I could tickle a termite under the chin. 25 in a wake-up. I'm so short I could parachute off a dime. 25 in a wake-up, man. I'm too short to mess with.
As their tour of duty passed, some marked off each day on an ordinary calendar. Others used a special short-timers calendar, usually a picture of a sexy nude woman and drawn in a paint-by-the-number style, with the descending numbers leading finally to the most strategic parts of her body. For the past few months, a permanent two-lane bridge connecting Cam Ranh Peninsula to the mainland had been under construction. Located near the NAF at the western end of the runway, it opened on the 24th of April, allowing heavy vehicles to cross in both directions. With the My Ca pontoon bridge no longer needed, it was disassembled. April saw the Seabees complete a number of construction projects that would significantly improve the working and living conditions at NAF. Among these was the Navy's air-conditioned two-story headquarters building. Besides providing office space for the Navy administration, it contained a number of other facilities to serve the men at NAF. On the ground floor was a small naval exchange, stocked with a wide range of goods including stereos and photographic equipment, as well as items to meet everyday needs. Besides the NX was the Fleet Post Office, which served both sailors and Crazy Cats, handling 30,000 pounds of incoming mail, 18,000 pounds of outgoing mail, and issuing $60,000 of money orders each month. The building also had modern medical and dental clinics to serve Navy personnel. Besides the Navy Exchange, NAF also saw the opening of a laundry, barber shop, and a tailor shop. Located on the main street, they were operated by Vietnamese companies under contract with the military exchange. The Vietnamese housemaids kept the NAF barracks clean and tidy, but the laundry was still done at the NAF laundry, which had a captive audience. With 900 heads of hair on the base and military regulations dictating the hair's length, the barber shop was ensured a steady stream of customers. Customers could also opt for a shave, manicure, or massage. The tailor shop did a brisk business in making and sewing name tags and patches like these. Soldiers with a flair for fashion could also have their baggy jungle fatigues tailored to a smarter fit. Those wanting tailor-made civilian suits, slacks, or shirts could select their style from a catalog and choose their material from swatches. The tailor then took their body measurements, noting them on a diagram that they would send off to Hong Kong sweatshops for cutting and sewing. Final adjustments to the fit were made after delivery a month or so later. The tailor shop also provided engraving services, the most popular being the engraving of Zippo lighters with insignias, pictures, or slogans, which ranged from humorous to poetic and pornographic to philosophic. Vietnam Zippos have since become collector's items and demand a much higher price than the original $2 paid for them at the PX. Besides Zippos, the engraver could also produce custom-made items like this Crazy Cat belt buckle. The Navy's Special Services saw a number of improvements at NAF as well. One was the opening of a library which offered a comfortable retreat from the men's busy day with over 7,000 books and a tape center. Another improvement was the opening of a hobby shop. Special Services also opened a sports gear checkout counter for those wishing to play at the sports field that the Seabees had recently completed. One of the most popular improvements at NAF was the construction of an outdoor movie theater. Weather permitting, Special Services showed movies there every night. Soon after construction, the theater was further enhanced with tiered seating, concrete flooring, and a new projector booth housing a concession stand selling popcorn, soft drinks, and beer. Another welcome addition was the construction and opening of 3 clubs, which operated 7 days a week. The Officers' Club was known as the Down Winds, then later as Sandman Lounge. A Chief Petty Officers Club, or Non-Commissioned Officers Club in Army vernacular, was opened within their barracks. Largest of the 3 was the Bayview Inn, the EM Club. The Bayview had a bar and restaurant as well as slot machines and recorded music. Evening entertainment was varied and frequent, with bands from the Orient and Australia performing to packed audiences. Often the shows included a go-go dancer like this club in Long Bin. Occasionally, the dancers wore much less, and on those occasions, photography was prohibited, not only to protect the dancers' modesty, but to prevent complaints from the soldiers' parents and their congressmen. Whether the shows had go-go dancers or not, they always seemed to end with the same song. Though this tune by the Animals had reached only number 16 in the States way back in 1965, in Vietnam it would hold the top spot for the duration of the war.
In the sturdy old park of the city, where the sun refused to shine, people tell me there ain't no use in me trying.
With the construction of NAF essentially completed, the Seabees put finishing touches to the main gate, building the guardhouse and, with the help of Vietnamese laborers, landscaping the entrance. On the 1st of May, NAF saw the arrival of VP-50, replacing VP-17, who rotated back to Sangley Point. With them, VP-50 brought the Navy's newest patrol aircraft, the P-3A Orion, which would replace the Navy's aging fleet of P-2H Neptunes. Also in May, nearly a year after the Crazy Cats had arrived, the Seabees finally finished their barracks. Furnished with flush toilets and showers on the ground floor, it was luxurious by military wartime standards.